Dragons, the big boys, girls, and thems of D&D. The titular monster of Dungeons & Dragons and arguably the most iconic of the fantasy genre. Most of the world has a creature or tale that people will equate to a dragon, and with all that inspiration, it should mean that we have a lot of good dragons in D&D, right? I mean, that's why we have 10 dragons in the base 5e monster manual. 10 completely different dragons. Except we don't. We have 10 different flavors of toast. Well, actually, it's just a thin spread of 5 different elemental jams on top of either white or wheat bread. Now, don't get me wrong, the lore behind these jams is awesome, and they look different, but with the little thinnest spread of jam, it's hard to even taste it. Okay, let's get away from this metaphor and explain the issue a little bit clearer. In the original 5e monster manual, the only difference between the chromatics is some small movement abilities, some of the base stats, and the elemental damage type. Now for me, this is hugely disappointing, and after tackling the black and white chromatics to make the Wither and Frostfear dragons, I'm ready to take on the strongest, the one and only dragoniest of dragons, the Red Dragon. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually get into the meat of this, the Red Dragon's lore and vibe. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take, pun not intended, but appreciated, but the Red Dragon's lore is kind of the least interesting to me. Now, that doesn't mean it's bad, far from it. I just mean that it's the most basic, and this is by design. The Red Dragon is the strongest chromatic, and as such, they are supposed to be the pinnacle of dragonhood and what comes to your mind when you think of dragons. When you look at most dragons in pop culture media, they're probably closer to a red dragon than any other. When you ask, what do dragons breathe, the most likely answer is fire, unless you're talking to someone like me who plays way too much D&D and then will answer, well, what kind of dragon is it? Overall, a red dragon is just all the aspects of dragons turned up to 11. Dragons are prideful, the red dragons are the proudest. Dragons are powerful, the red dragons are the strongest. Dragons like hoarding and treasure, red dragons like their treasure expensive and will swear vengeance if a coin is missing. Dragons usually vibe with mountains, guess where the red dragons typically live? Like I said, red dragons are the dragoniest dragons to ever dragon. So much so that I bet if you think of a dragon from a non-D&D piece of media right now, they have something in common with the red dragon besides just both being dragons. So with all that established, what do I want to take and focus on to make this variant? Now, like I said before, and I want to repeat now, there is nothing wrong with Red Dragon lore. The classics are the classics for a reason. The reason I make variants specifically is because then I'm not bound by decades and multiple editions of lore, or have the weird possibility of going against the author's original intents. This new dragon is heavily inspired by the 5e Chromatic Red, but it's not the Chromatic Red. If you want to use this new dragon, you can run them alongside the Chromatic Red, or it can replace them. It's totally up to you. Now, I do want to address the feedback and comments that I've seen in previous videos, like, if you read the lore, you would know that you should run each dragon differently. And yes, there is truth to this, but if you really think it's fine that they have almost the exact same stat block, then we can get rid of all the martial and weapon classes, right? Like Barbarian, Fighter, Paladin, Monk, Rogue, Ranger. We don't need any of them. Just have them all play a champion fighter and tell your players to run them differently, right? It's okay that they all have the exact same abilities. Their stats and weapons will be different, so just tell them to run their characters in combat the way their characters would fight, right? Look, I love flavor, lore, and combat tactics, but are you really telling me that you wouldn't like abilities that reflect the dragon's personality and separate them from other variants? Another common take is just give dragons spellcasting. And while there's nothing really wrong with this one, it just feels like a lazy fix to me. Like, dragons are inherently magical creatures, and while there's nothing wrong with giving them access to spells, I prefer to give them inherent magical abilities that aren't available anywhere else. Then, if you want to give them spellcasting on top of that, go for it, but at the core, they will always have these fantastical things that they can just do with their elements. And then there's my least favorite take of, it's the DM's job to punch up the stat blocks, which is bad. It's a bad take that after paying for a book of stat blocks, you still need to go punch them up on your own. I mean, this is something that I do and I enjoy doing, but the idea that a DM needs to do this is bad. So you can take that opinion and you can go to the bad take jail. We respect and support DMs in this house, especially those who don't have time to dive into every stat block so that their friends can have fun in the games that they are taking time out of their day to prep and run. That all being said, with the Red Dragon being a classic, it does pose an interesting question of what to do when making a variant of it. But after thinking about it for a bit, I've come up with something that I think is interesting and fun to put into your worlds. And it all focuses on them being exactly what they are, the strongest. How would a dragon born to be the strongest, mixed with a might makes right mentality, perceive the world around them? How would someone who views everything else, even other dragons, as lesser beings act? Now, this could manifest in a variety of ways, but with fire as their element, I see them as creatures born with the flames of ambition in their soul. Dragons that see the world revolve around them because they are the protagonist of the story. While these wormlings come into the world under the weight of expectations of being the strongest, they won't consider buckling under them. They will meet each and every expectation, whether it's the expectations of others, the Dragon Queen, or their own. They are the greatest thing to grace their planet, and they will leave their mark on the world or burn out. With all that in mind, allow me to tell you about the Ruinflame Dragons. Long ago, while the world was still young, the Dragon Queen sat in her lair looking over her creations. Ever since the Frostsphere had been created, she had begun to experiment, creating more of her children. At this point, she had a few different variations, all created in her image, but while she was happy enough with them, she still couldn't call any of them a masterpiece. As she thought about this, she watched the destruction that her children caused on the pathetic mortals of the world. As she watched town after town and city after city fall, she noticed one consistency: fire. Fire always seemed to spread across the destruction. Regardless of the element they faced, it always seemed to be there, spreading across houses, forests, trails, and anything else it came in contact with. It would burn until everything was gone. It would burn until there was nothing left to burn. And with this, she smiled at a realization. She began working on her next creation, a body of pure energy, a soul of pure ambition. Fire would run through their veins, and this dragon would spread it across the land until all the world bathed in flames and crumbled to their might. To her might. Once she was finished with her work, the egg sat before her in the fire, enduring its final temperament. Once the scales on the egg dimmed from the blinding orange of a molten ore to a bright red sheen, she knew that this would be her masterpiece. She had created a flame that would bring ruin to the world, but before she would give the dragon their name, she bestowed it with one final gift: a piece of her own ambition. The dragon would always want more. They would always climb higher. They would always be confident in the knowledge that they were the best, that they could do anything. From the moment they hatched to the moment that flame burned out, they would never stop working to claim everything that they deserved. And so, the Ruinflame Dragon stepped into the world for the first time. Ruinflame Dragons are the pinnacle of strength among chromatics. The only thing to rival their power being their pride, which drives them to push even further, to become stronger, to claim more treasure and destroy more land. A Ruinflame will often find a remote mountain to claim as its lair, but the lair is only a place for it to rest and guard its hoard. A place that they can return to with new treasure that they have taken from their lessers. While all dragons hoard, a Ruinflame's collection will usually be the most varied, with the only common factor typically being that it is all valuable. Though trophies from particularly strong opponents that they have slain do seem to be put in more prominent areas. These red-scaled dragons are also the least likely to be able to strike a bargain with for any items in their hoard. With other chromatics, while it isn't common, deals can usually be struck for certain pieces of treasure. These deals favor the dragon far more often than they are a fair deal, and there is no guarantee that nothing underhanded is afoot, but these deals are still made. However, with a Ruinflame, a deal being struck for any treasure in its hoard is almost unheard of. Nothing is more sacred to a Ruinflame than their treasure, and there are many tales of entire towns and countrysides being razed to the ground because one thief was able to steal a handful of gold coins. The only thing that is a more serious offense to a Ruinflame than stealing from it is questioning its power. Oddly enough, this can not only be a fatal flaw, but also its most redeeming factor. For every 10 stories of a Ruinflame brutally destroying a town for stolen gold or perceived disrespect, there is an epic tale of how a Ruinflame fought against or defeated a world threat. whether it was an insult to their pride or simply the desire to push an upstart down into the dirt. A Ruinflame fighting for altruistic reasons is almost unheard of. A famous quote that embodies this came from a Ruinflame Dragon preparing to fight a World Eater.
"If that abomination eats the world, what will be left for me to destroy and rule?"
Regardless though, a Ruinflame will only back down if they are certain that they are out of their depth, and their pride is willing to let them accept that. As a Ruinflame gets older and stronger, this gets harder for them to accept, and therefore the necessary gap in power for retreat to become an option grows bigger and wider. The second aspect of a Ruinflame's personality that will prevent them from retreating is their hunger for glory. On some level, they seem to be more aware of their own mortality than any other dragon, even if this is something that they are unable to truly come to terms with or unwilling to ever admit. While it would be unwise to tell them this does make them unusually similar to humans and other short-lived species. With this drive, they are like stars that burn bright for as long as they can. They will do everything they can to get stronger and increase their abilities so that they can bring destruction on an even greater scale and build a horde bigger than any other dragon before. Ruinflames are one of the few dragons to ever be recorded actually training to increase their strength and abilities. But great strength and power is useless unless it is displayed properly, and this is something that Ruinflames exceed at. One reason that many Ruinflames have epic tales that cause their names to strike fear into the hearts of mortals is the high number of lone survivors from encounters with these leviathans. Ruinflames have often let talented storytellers escape during attacks on cities or towns, allowing them to head to a safe distance and watch the majestic destruction. These tales spread and will often lead to adventurers trying to take down the Ruinflame, only to be destroyed and have a single survivor to be allowed to make it back to the town. This survivor will tell the tale of how their friends fell to the dragon, sparking the survivor to try again with new adventurers or a new group to take up the mantle. This cycle can repeat itself multiple times, spreading the dragon's name far and wide as an unstoppable threat and making their names larger than life. The powerful or lucky few that have been able to defeat a grown Ruinflame Dragon almost always refer to the fight as a life and death encounter. Flames that will burn creatures summoned from the hells, bodies burning just from being near the dragon, and the dragon's unwillingness to fall in battle. For these reasons, when a Ruinflame appears, it is treated very seriously, and only the most experienced, powerful, brave, or foolish of adventurers are willing to take the job to fight the monster. For that is what a Ruinflame Dragon truly is, a monster. And that is the Ruinflame Dragon, a dragon born with a fire beneath it, and one that will use that fire to leave its mark on the world or die trying. Instead of being the protagonist of their own story, they believe that they are the protagonist of the story. They are the ones that will do the impossible. They are built different. They are special. And everything else besides them are unimportant actors, footnotes in their story. They have a desire for their name to go down in history as a dragon that will put fear into the puny mortals even after they are long gone. These dragons live hard and fast, but they are not invincible. While these dragons are certainly very strong and powerful, they will still die just like every other dragon. With their great power and pride, it's not uncommon for Ruinflames to get in over their head. But a Ruinflame's pride is built up over centuries, and while younger wormlings will still jump at challenges, they are still able to know when they're out of their depths. But we have a vibe for these dragons, so let's get into their stats. What can the Ruinflames actually do? Well, in addition to the normal buffs and balancing for hit points and breath attack numbers, the Ruinflames get 3 new non-action abilities. The first is Flame Aura. With the anime protagonist mentality that they have, these dragons enjoy being in the middle of the fight, and the Flame Aura helps punish their enemies for daring to step close to them. With both range and fire damage that scales through the different forms, being around these dragons in combat can be difficult. The second ability, Prideful Challenge, entices the enemy combatants to stay in that damaging aura. As a bonus action, the Ruinflame can issue a challenge to a creature that they can see within 30 feet, and the creature can choose to accept or deny that challenge. If the challenge is accepted, the creature approaches the dragon as a reaction, and gains a bonus to all attacks made against the dragon until the end of their next turn. However, if the challenge is denied, the insult fuels the dragon's anger, and at the start of the Ruinflame Dragon's next turn, they get 2 chances to regain their breath attack. Lastly, a Ruinflame Dragon refuses to accept defeat, and even more, they refuse to accept death. Once per day when they would be struck down, they can choose to fight beyond the restrictions of a normal creature, regaining half of their maximum hit points and fighting off any temporary debuffs that they have suffered, but also suffering a small loss in armor class. The Frightful Presence ability, bite, and claw attacks have stayed the same other than the corrective scaling to their damage, but the tail attack now grapples a creature on a hit as long as it is smaller than the dragon. But this grapple comes with a unique addition to it. While the Ruinflame has a creature grappled in this way, they can slam the creature against the ground, a building, or even another creature, causing the grappled combatant caught in the tail to share the damage with whatever they strike. Lastly, the Fire Breath now sets creatures who fail the saving throw on fire for 1 minute, taking damage at the start of each turn while they are on fire. Just a reminder that all of the breath attack extra effects that I've been adding to these dragons are designed so that they can be remedied mid-combat. A creature can use an action to stop, drop, and roll, someone else can put them out as an action, they could submerge themselves in water, or someone could use a spell that would put out a normal fire. The minute timer is just there for players who decide not to put themselves out for whatever reason. Next, we have legendary actions. The detect and tail actions have stayed the same, but the Ruinflames can cause creatures they can see to burst into flames with the combustion ability, forcing a dexterity saving throw or taking fire damage. They also can spread their wings and use their flames to propel them a short distance, causing them to clothesline adventurers with their wings and knock them prone. And then the Ancient Form specific legendary action, Soul of Flame, where the Ruinflame pushes past its limits and allows its flames to reach new heights. When this ability is used, any fire damage that the Ruinflame deals ignores resistances, and any creature that is immune to fire is treated as resistant instead. Lastly, we have the lair actions. A Ruinflame's lair is unbearably hot, and it can inflict 2 forms of heat exhaustion. One that can temporarily affect multiple people, penalizing attack rolls and ability checks, and another that when focused on an individual, can cause them to waste an action or gain a stack of exhaustion. Flames can rise from the ground, blocking off escapes or surrounding a creature to trap them. The ground can melt through shoes, causing fire damage and making it difficult to traverse. And lastly, my personal favorite, steam can be expelled beneath a foe's feet, dealing fire damage and propelling them 20 feet into the air. And if that creature can't fly, well, let's just say there's a bit more damage to be had on the way down. And that is the Ruinflame Dragon, from lore to stats. If you want to run a Ruinflame Dragon in your game, you can download the stat blocks for the Wormling, Young, Adult, and Ancient forms for free on my Ko-Fi and Patreon. Everything I make is available on a pay-what-you-want system, so if you want to toss a couple bucks my way, I will be very thankful. But if you can't or don't want to, there is nothing to worry about. Just hit like if you like the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and share it with someone who you think will like this idea. Like, I don't know, maybe your DM? And I do have other videos besides the ones about dragons like this one where I go over my favorite underrated villain couple from Season 1 of Castlevania Nocturne. I also made 2 stat blocks that you can download there while you're downloading the Ruinflame. With that, thanks for watching, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and I will catch you next time.